everyone doing at DLD? Is everyone having a good time? Awesome. So for this session, we decided to switch it up a bit. Instead of having a panel and then having someone ask us questions, we're going to ask each other questions. Questions that we find interesting. And hopefully we don't put each other on the spot.
Yeah, actually, that's already a compromise, because I actually only wanted to ask Ruchi questions. Yeah, because I think she's extremely interesting. I think being the first female engineer at Facebook and things like that, she's got tons of great stories to tell. So why don't we start off with you? You've been a member of two hyper-growth businesses, Facebook as well as Dropbox. So tell us a bit about your experiences there. I mean, how is it to be part of such a really fast-growing environment?
So Facebook was my training ground. It's where I learned what I know today. It was amazing to see it grow from 20-odd people to a few thousand, from 5 million users to 500 and then a billion, and to be able to launch products like Newsfeed, which people first hated and protested, and then eventually loved and used to organize protests on. I left because I had this itch to do it all over again, and there were amazing people at Facebook to carry on the torch. At Dropbox, I'm seeing a lot of the same growth. How many of you in the audience use Dropbox today? That's pretty incredible. Thank you for using it.
And you know that then you're also Amazon customers at the same time, eh?
They love Dropbox more. But Dropbox is pervasive, and we have over 100 million users. And when I think about my own use case, I have 3 laptops, 1 Android phone, 1 iPhone, 2 iPads, a computer connected to my TV to entertain myself, and Dropbox is the layer that connects all these devices across all these platforms. It's what keeps me sane. So I believe it's going to be the next technology platform that amazing applications and new technologies are built on, which gets me excited to go into work every day.
Okay.
My turn now. So you've had an extremely successful academic career with many publications and have advised many successful PhD students. Why did you leave academia?
Oh, that's a hard question, actually, but I did. Yeah, so actually, my research in academia was in scale and reliability of large-scale mission-critical enterprise systems. Yeah, so in some sense, it's very relevant for systems like Amazon. But I lived by the words of one of my great heroes in computer science, Roger Needham. He was a professor at the computer lab in Cambridge, and Roger always had said that systems should be built to do useful things for real people. Now, that's not all computer science. Maybe computer science is way more fundamental. But I always believed in my research that you should build real systems. And for that, I often work together with consultants for larger computer companies. I did a startup on the side. But when I came to Amazon one day to give a presentation about some epidemic techniques that we had developed, when I went there, I first thought, bookshop. You know, and what is it? It's a few web servers and a database. But when one glance in the kitchen, and I realized that what's happening at Amazon is that you can take any chapter of a computer science book, and it is actually applied within Amazon, but then at massive scale. And actually, they were anticipating scales of 2 or 3 more orders of magnitude, and the things that needed to be developed there nobody had done that before. So it was a great challenge, actually, when they invited me to come and join them.
So do you think you've done more good for the world through academia or through Amazon?
Well, there's a great difference, of course, between academia and production. Often the things we do at Amazon, we say, well, we still do research, we just call it production. But in academia is a very egocentric world. You know, it's your students, it's your publications, it's your tenure where you have to work. And in production, you cannot get anything done alone. You know, in a company, everything is teamwork. Everything you have to build is really, you have to do it with a team, because otherwise you can't get anything done. And I like to believe that, you know, a lot of things that we've done at Amazon, on one hand, benefits, for example, the larger community through the cloud stuff that we've done, but we've also publicized some of the work we did, like on Dynamo, where we really took lots of lessons from academia and then brought it into the real world. There's one hard thing in actually taking academic research into production. It is that many academics make what's called assumptions when they build their algorithms. And for example, one of those famous assumptions is failures are not correlated, meaning that things will only fail one at a time. It's not realistic, it's not true. Things fail in bunches, or things fail in cascading things. So many of those algorithms you can't use. So we have to often at scale develop new technologies for ourselves. So, yeah. So one of the things that that often Europeans don't get is that the academic institutions in the US have major differences. So you're a CMU-trained engineer, yet, Dropbox is famously known as being a tough MIT crowd. So how is it to be a CMU engineer among MIT folks?
Well, we write better code and beat them at all things technical. But, I mean, being more serious, we work really well together. We're more alike than different. We have similar engineering values, but I'm still trying to recruit as many CMU kids as I can to even out the numbers. You need to ask me questions that don't compare my workplaces, my academic institutions. But I have one for you. Okay. So the two of us always get asked to define the cloud, what cloud means, where is cloud going. But cloud's been around for a really long time now. It's been a few years. So I wanted to ask you what patterns, in keeping with the theme of the conference, are you seeing with companies that build their products in the cloud? How has it influenced product, technology, and even more interestingly, organizational development?
Oh, well, how long do we have? This is a very long question. I think, so first of all, I think Amazon has been the pioneer in cloud computing, one of the earlier players in that world. We have hundreds of thousands of businesses running on our platform now, 190 countries. And there isn't a type of business that is not a cloud customer at this moment. Yeah, and so I think if you want to look for patterns, you often do segmentation. So, so there's startups, there's SMB, there's enterprise, there's public sector, and there's science. I think those are sort of the big blocks. It's obvious that today, I think there isn't a young business, a startup being built that is not using any form of cloud technologies. I think most investors will frown if money is actually, the capital is actually being used for hardware these days. SMB, you see mainly that they're not necessarily procuring server types, but they're actually really going the software as a service way. Many SMBs do not have an IT department or have just one guy that's just half-time actually working for you. And as such, they now suddenly get access to all sorts of high-scale enterprise-level software as a service that they can get procured there. And in the enterprise, there's such a rapid adoption in the enterprise. It's all over the place. There isn't a vertical in the enterprise, whether it's media, whether it's oil and gas, whether it is entertainment, banking, all of them are using cloud services. And there's a whole range there. I mean, on one hand, it is the internet-facing properties, whether it's for marketing, whether it's for e-banking or whatever, is all making use of cloud computing, but also moving their ERP systems. A good example here in Germany is one of the very big luxury hotel chains here, Kempinski, actually is moving all of their ERP systems for all of their hotels onto the cloud because they decided they're not an IT company. And if you really look at what's the value proposition of the cloud is that it is that you can actually focus on your customers and do not have to focus on things that actually don't matter. At Amazon, we really believe very strongly in lean manufacturing and the principles of lean. And I think in the context of cloud, lean means that, lean is all about the reduction of waste. And where cloud computing helps you with is that you can purely focus on your customers. You no longer have to do, look at all the things that are similar. And then we look at science and public sector. So over 300 agencies in the US government are making use of Amazon Web Services, 3,500 educational institutions, and then there is science. And probably it's somewhat the most exciting stuff is happening in science. We saw yesterday pictures, if you were at the dinner, of the Mars rover. of Curiosity. Now, all data that comes back from Curiosity is all directly streamed into Amazon Simple Storage Service, and it's available for all researchers around the world to use. The 1000 Genome Project is another one. You know, it's now 200 terabytes. All of that lives in the Amazon cloud. And if you see how some drug research is being sped up from normally have it run for 2 months, can now be done in 2 hours by just making use of 50,000 cores around the world. So there is such a wide variety of impact of cloud computing on all sorts of business. It's amazing.
Do you have a concrete number on cost savings using the cloud versus using the old way of developing?
So I think that, first of all, there is cost savings. Yeah, I think it depends a lot on the kind of particular application that you're looking for. You know, is this the more, let's say, the more. So first of all, one of the savings is in just not having to put up the capital that you didn't have. Yeah, but most of the cost savings will actually come if you can actually reduce your operational cost as well. So if you have something that has some periodic use, then you can actually dramatically drive your cost down. We also give you all sorts of tools in reserved instances and a spot market where you bid for capacity and all these things to actually really drive your cost down. It's some companies, well, take for example Samsung. Samsung, I don't know if you know the beautiful smart TVs that Samsung makes. Actually, it's all software. Yeah, and those smart hubs that the smart TVs connect to run in the Amazon cloud. When Samsung actually decided first to actually do it themselves, they realized next to actually having to acquire the knowledge to actually run this, they had to put up $34 million just to get started. And by actually doing this on Amazon, they immediately saved themselves $34 million. And so there's a whole range of these kind of examples that you'll find all around the world of people saving a lot of money. Now, enterprises often come to us with a cost-saving idea in mind, but they will always tell you that the real reason why they're in the cloud is because of the agility. That they're able to do things now that they were not able to do before, or go to market much faster. If there's one particular pattern that we see in enterprises, is that they're willing to experiment a lot more now. I mean, there's an abundance of products in the market, competition is murderous, and many companies are trying to figure out new ways to build products. And they don't really know whether their customers are actually going to like that. And so what you see with startups, with a minimal viable product, you actually see enterprises doing this as well. So Eric Ries, the author of the Lean Startup book, has his definition of a startup. It's an organization that builds new products and services under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And you know what? Enterprises are not that different these days, because they also build products under extreme uncertainty. And so they make use of cloud to actually have minimal investment in the sort of experiments that they do. But you guys, hey, then let's not talk about our platform. You just mentioned, you believe that Dropbox is a platform as well. I think one of the power of Dropbox is indeed the many different devices where you guys are active at. And thinking about patterns, what are the kind of patterns that you see in sort of the use of these different devices?
So we've observed some really interesting trends. So we have over 100 million users, and they've installed Dropbox on approximately like 400 million devices. So you have to believe that on average, users have at least 2 connected devices. That in itself is a really interesting trend to keep in mind, because that's only going to increase as time goes on. You're going to move from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 different connected devices. The other interesting thing that we've noticed is that a lot of our growth used to come from desktop clients and the web, with people sharing folders and inviting non-Dropbox users through referrals. But today, a lot of our growth is driven by mobile. People going to the App Store and downloading Dropbox onto their mobile devices. And that kind of growth is not viral, and neither is it social. On the content front, users save 1 billion files every 24 hours. And that's a lot of content. We're not talking about status updates or simple one-line push notifications. We're talking about rich content in the form of photos, documents, videos. And more and more usage is becoming collaborative. So for example, just anecdotally, we have teachers using Dropbox with 10-year-olds to collaborate and create original music compositions. We have non-profits in Zimbabwe that are trying to save the rhinos, and because they have low bandwidth and limited connectivity, they use Dropbox for board meetings and to raise funds and share data across the board. And then finally, we have paying users in over 200 different countries. And that just goes to say that it's not a local phenomenon. It's not something that's driven by the US alone. It's truly a global phenomenon. But talking about mobile, I want to know what trends you've seen in e-commerce on mobile devices.
Well, no, I think Jeff has already publicly gave some predictions around this as well, that pretty soon more than 50% of actually the purchases on Amazon.com will come from non-PC devices. Let's put it like that. Yeah, but it's a very different shopping behavior. Yeah, remember that if you sit behind your PC, it's sort of a forward-leaning kind of thing. But with your tablet, you basically lay on the couch and you shop. That requires very different applications to be built to actually address that. So I think we're pretty early in this forms of e-commerce there. But another thing about mobile is, of course, we're a big content provider, and we also build devices such that you consume that content. I think one of the things that is happening with tablets and mobile and whether it's your phones or other places is that in the past you would load your content on that device. These days, your device is just a window into content that lives in the cloud. Yeah, and I want to be able, if I step tomorrow on the treadmill in the hotel, yes, I do that kind of thing, I actually want my treadmill to reconfigure itself and immediately show all my content, whether it's my music, whether it's my video, whether it's my subscriptions. And I think we're not that far from that. I mean, we just launched the integration with Ford cars, with our cloud player, so you can get all your music in your car whenever you want that. So we see a lot of these things happening there. Before we run out of time, there's one really important question I want to ask you. I know that Dropbox is seen by many as a consumer product, but I also see quite a few people in the enterprise actually making use of Dropbox. So what are the things that you hear about the enterprise using your product?
So that's an interesting question. People use Dropbox because it's simple and it just works. People use Dropbox to share their life's works and share their memories. And they've started bringing it into the workplace because it helps them with productivity and efficiency. So for example, law firms use it to coordinate with lawyers in the court. They use it to analyze remote field research. Design agencies use it. And even universities use it. For example, Harvard has all its students who are taking the Introduction to CS class install Dropbox. And then there's this organic network effect that if you take Dropbox to work, you're using it to collaborate and share files with your colleagues who then end up becoming Dropbox users. There's this interesting trend, which is essentially the consumerization of IT. We've seen it with iPhones. Prior to iPhones, people would use BlackBerries and Palms at work, but now it's the end user, the employee who bought the iPhone into work and said, we want to use the iPhone at work. And we're seeing similar trends with Dropbox. So we've started working pretty intensely on Dropbox for teams and businesses. We're working with IT admins to make sure it's a product that they appreciate. It's a win-win situation for all of us. Users get to use a product they love. IT gets to be the hero. And then have a product that's easy to deploy and use across different platforms. I think we're at an end, but Werner, can you give me one interesting prediction for next year?
So we were going to do a prediction each. So I go first?
Yes.
And we actually didn't touch on this topic, but I think being in Europe, I think privacy is something that is extremely important for many customers. And one of the things that I expect to see happening this year is a much greater emphasis on the use of encryption as being a tool for customers to protect themselves. Yeah, and this is, I think, a sort of best practice, whether you do this in the cloud or whether you do it on-premise. Encryption is going to be the tool for you to protect your sensitive data, whether this is personal identifiable information, whether this is sensitive business data. Encryption, we will see a lot of consumer-based style encryption, as well as for enterprises to be able to do that, such that they can protect themselves.
All right, so my prediction. In 1999, less than 1% of photos were digital. Can you imagine? Less than 1% of your photos were digital back in 1999. Fast forward 12 years, in 2011, over 99.5% of your photos were digital. So my prediction is in a few years, over 90% of your photos are going to be mobile photos. And then in a few more years, photos is going to be the content most produced by users, even more than like documents and videos and everything else combined.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.